There is a room in London that the world has never fully seen. A room tucked inside a grand Victorian home on Logan Place in Kensington, surrounded by tall stone walls and wild English garden roses that bloomed every summer, regardless of what was happening inside. The house was called Garden Lodge, and in the last years of his life it was the only place in the world where Freddie Mercury felt safe enough to simply be a man. Not a legend, not a performer, not a spectacle, just a man. By 1991, most of the world still did not know what was happening to him. They saw the tabloid photographs. They noticed the weight loss. They read the cruel headlines. They whispered the same words that people whispered about thousands of men in those years. Words that carried a different kind of terror in 1991, before the medications existed, before the science caught up, before the stigma began to crack. But Freddie said nothing publicly. He gave no interviews about his health. He denied nothing and confirmed nothing. He simply kept working, kept singing, kept showing up, because that was the only way he knew how to be alive. What the world did not know was that behind those stone walls on Logan Place, a conversation had already taken place. A conversation between four men who had spent over 20 years building something together, something that no amount of money, no number of sold-out stadiums, no catalog of anthems could ever fully explain. It was a conversation that changed everything, and almost no one heard it. This is that story. His name was Farrokh Bulsara. He was born on September 5, 1946, on the island of Zanzibar, off the east coast of Africa. His parents, Bomi and Jer, were Persian Zoroastrians, and they gave him a life that straddled worlds from the very beginning. When he was 8 years old, he was already playing the piano. When he was 13, he was shipped off to a boarding school near Bombay, where he formed his first band, the Hectics, and stood on a stage for the first time and discovered something he would spend the rest of his life chasing. The feeling of becoming someone else in front of a crowd. Or perhaps the feeling of finally becoming himself. In 1964, the political upheaval in Zanzibar forced the Bulsara family to flee to England. They settled in Feltham, a quiet suburb of West London, and Farrokh enrolled in art school, studied design, haunted the local music scene, and slowly transformed himself. He changed his name. He became Freddie Mercury. He joined a band called Smile, which already had a guitarist named Brian May and a drummer named Roger Taylor. When the original vocalist left in 1970, Freddie stepped in, renamed the group Queen, and insisted that bassist John Deacon complete the four-piece in 1971. Nobody in London took them seriously at first, but Freddie Mercury had never needed the world's permission to believe in himself. By 1975, they had recorded Bohemian Rhapsody. By 1977, We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You were playing in stadiums worldwide. By 1980, the band had become something beyond category, a rock group that defied every rule of what a rock group was supposed to be: theatrical, operatic, flamboyant, classical, hard, soft, ridiculous, and devastating all at once. And the engine of all of it was Freddie, that voice, that presence, that strange and magnificent refusal to be ordinary. Behind the stage persona, though, Freddie Mercury was a deeply private man. He had loved a woman named Mary Austin since the early 1970s. He had told her in private that he was bisexual, and she had stayed. They never married, but she became the person he trusted most in the world, the person he called his soulmate, the person he would one day leave almost everything to when he died. She was the one who was still standing beside him at the end, changing bandages and making tea and sitting in silence when silence was all he could offer. He was also, in the last years of his life, in a relationship with a man named Jim Hutton, a gentle, quiet Irishman who had worked as a barber at the Savoy Hotel and had no idea who Freddie Mercury was when they first met. Jim moved into Garden Lodge in 1985. He wore a wedding ring. Freddie wore one too. They never called it a marriage publicly, but they both knew what it was. And in the final weeks, when Freddie could no longer get out of bed on his own, Jim held him through the nights and did not let go. The doctor came in late April of 1987. It was Mary Austin who finally made the appointment. Freddie had been avoiding it. He knew on some level what the doctor was going to say. The weight loss, the fatigue, the things he noticed but did not speak of, they had been accumulating for months. According to Peter Freestone, his closest assistant and friend who lived with him at Garden Lodge, Freddie did not want to hear the diagnosis. He was afraid of the word. He was afraid of what it would mean for the people around him. The word came anyway: HIV positive. In 1987, that was not a word attached to a manageable chronic condition. In 1987, that word was a sentence. The treatments available were brutal and often made patients sicker before they could attempt to make them better. The mortality rate was staggering. People were dying in hospitals while their families stood in the hallway because the nurses were afraid to enter the room. The stigma was not a social inconvenience. It was a wall that separated the infected from the rest of the world, and on the other side of that wall, Many men like Freddie were alone. He told a very small circle. Mary knew, Jim knew, Peter Freestone knew. His family in Zanzibar would eventually learn. The press did not know, the public did not know, and for a while, neither did the three men who had spent 2 decades standing on stages next to him. The moment came around 1988, during the sessions for what would become the Miracle album. The exact date has never been recorded. There was no dramatic staging, no cameras, no journalists, no carefully worded press release. There was just Freddie in a room with Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon, saying the words he had been carrying alone for over a year. Brian May recalled the conversation years later in the 2011 documentary Queen, Days of Our Lives. He said that Freddie looked at them and said, words as close to exact as memory allows, something along these lines. Look, you probably know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm suffering from. You know what the problem is. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want to make music to the day I die. And let's get on with it. That was it. No tears requested, no extended grief, no permission to fall apart. He had told them because they deserved to know, because they were the people he had made his life with musically, because there was no other version of the truth that he could offer them and still look them in the eye. But he was also drawing a clear boundary. He did not want pity. He did not want long conversations in dressing rooms about treatments and prognosis and the unfairness of it all. He wanted the only thing that had ever made him feel fully alive. He wanted to make music. The three of them sat with that for a moment, and then they agreed they would give him exactly what he asked for. What happened next is one of the most quietly extraordinary chapters in rock history. Queen did not disband. They did not give interviews hinting at a crisis. They did not hold a press conference or leak anything to the tabloids or let the weight of what they knew crush the rhythm of what they were doing. They simply kept working, kept writing, kept showing up, and every time Freddie could come into the studio, they were there, ready. Roger Taylor said later that they made a collective decision, unspoken but absolute, to treat Freddie the way he wanted to be treated, as a bandmate, as a musician, as the lead singer of Queen, not as someone dying, even though he was. Brian May described it this way. What we did was get on with business as usual. That was what Freddie wanted. He said, I don't want anything to change, and there was no self-pity. No self-pity. From a man who was watching his own body dissolve. In 1990, the band traveled to Montreux, Switzerland, to begin work on a new album. Montreux was a small, elegant city on the edge of Lake Geneva, surrounded by Alps and vineyards, and the kind of quiet that feels almost unrealistic to people accustomed to London. Freddie had bought a flat there, partly for the peace, partly because by then the press situation in London had become unbearable. The photographers were outside Garden Lodge constantly. Roger Taylor later estimated there were 200 of them camped outside the house, a rotating mob with telephoto lenses pointed at the windows, trying to capture a photograph of him looking sick. They stuck cameras through toilet windows, Brian May said. Wherever Freddie went in London, they followed. He was being hunted by people who wanted to profit from his deterioration, who wanted the money shot, the gaunt face, the confirmation that the rumors were true. Montreux was different. People there had grown accustomed to seeing musicians working. Nobody made a fuss. Freddie could walk along the lake, sit in a cafe, look at the water, and feel, for a few hours at a time, like someone who still had some control over his own life. The studio sessions were not like anything that had come before. The band was always there, ready, but Freddie could only work in short bursts. He would come in for a few hours. He would sing. He would push himself to some edge of what was physically possible, and then he would stop because his body forced him to stop. Brian May said that for Freddie, the studio had become an oasis, the one place where life was still the same as it had always been. He loved making music. He lived for it. And then Brian May said the thing that cuts deepest. He said Freddie just kept telling them, write me more, write me stuff. I want to just sing this and do it. And when I am gone, you can finish it off. Write me more. That was the instruction. Not let's talk about what's happening. Not let me say goodbye properly. Just write me more songs so I can keep singing for as long as my body lets me. He had no fear, Brian May said. He had absolutely no fear. The disease was advancing in ways that were visible and terrible. Brian May spoke in an interview about a dinner during that period where Freddie showed him his foot. AIDS was destroying it. The disease had eaten through the tissue, and Brian May looked at what was left and had to hold himself together so he would not break down in front of Freddie. And Freddie looked at him and said, "Oh, Brian, I'm sorry. I've upset you by showing you that." That was the kind of man he was. In terrible pain, he was apologizing for making someone else uncomfortable. Brian May told him, "I'm not upset, Freddie, except to realize what you have to put up with." The album they made in those sessions was called Innuendo. It was released in January 1991. It debuted at #1. Nobody fully understood, listening to it that winter, that they were hearing a man make art in the direct presence of his own death, that the voice on those recordings had been pushed out of a body that was breaking down by the hour. The title track alone ran for almost 7 minutes. It was enormous, elaborate, strange, and beautiful. Freddie sang it like he was trying to put every unreleased note he had ever kept inside directly onto tape before time ran out. Innuendo was Queen's last album recorded as a foursome, but it was not the last music Freddie made. In May 1991, they filmed 2 music videos. One was for Innuendo, the other was for a song called These Are the Days of Our Lives. In the footage, you can see what was happening. Freddie is thin in ways that cannot be hidden. The lighting was gentle by design, arranged to make him look as strong as possible, but the eyes in that video carry something that no lighting rig can manage. There is a knowledge in them, a depth that goes somewhere the camera cannot follow. At the end of the video, Freddie looks directly into the lens and says, "I still love you." Those were his last words on camera. Also in May of 1991, in Montreux, they recorded a song called Mother Love. The lyrics spoke of wanting peace before death, of longing to be held, of someone facing the end and calling out for comfort. Freddie sang most of it. He sang it standing up, in pain, in a studio where the engineer Justin Shirley Smith said later that it was not a sad place. He said Freddie was one of the funniest people he had ever met. He said he was laughing most of the time, laughing, while he sang about dying. They determined later, after searching through old boxes of reel-to-reel tape, that the final recording session for Mother Love took place between May 13th and 16th of 1991. At some point during that session, Freddie had recorded the penultimate verse and said he was not feeling great. He said he would come back and finish it next time. He said he would sing the final verse when he returned. He never returned to the studio. Brian May recorded the final verse of Mother Love himself. It was the only proper thing to do. There was no other way to close the song that Freddie could not finish. By autumn of 1991, Freddie had returned to Garden Lodge. He had stopped taking the medications, reportedly after returning from Switzerland on November 10th. The medications were brutal, the side effects were severe, and at some point a dying man has to decide how he wants to spend whatever time remains. Freddie Mercury made his decision. He would live the last days on his own terms, in his home, surrounded by the people who loved him. The press was still outside. The photographers were still there, lenses pointed at the wall, waiting. Inside Garden Lodge, there was Jim Hutton, holding his hand through the nights. There was Peter Freestone, his assistant, managing the house, answering calls, standing between Freddie and the chaos of the outside world. There was Mary Austin, who had been his person for over 2 decades, and who in those final weeks took on the role that only someone who truly loves another human being can take on, the role of remaining steady in the face of unbearable loss. Brian May came to visit. He described it later with the precision of a man who had committed every detail to memory because he knew it was the last time. He said Freddie was in bed. The curtains were open. Freddie had asked for the curtains to be open so he could see out into his garden. The garden was still there. The roses were still there. The sky above Kensington was still the same sky. Brian sat beside the bed, and Freddie looked at him and said, "I'm so happy you're here. Not a performance, not a line. Just a man telling the truth to someone he loved." Roger Taylor tried to visit on November 24th. He was driving through London toward Garden Lodge when his phone rang. It was Peter Freestone. Roger pulled over or slowed down 300 yards from the house, and Peter told him on the phone that Freddie was gone. "Don't bother coming," he said. "He's gone." Roger Taylor had been 300 yards away. He never made it through the gate. On November 23rd, 1991, Freddie Mercury released a statement through his publicist. It was brief. It was clear. It was the last communication he would have with the world that had spent so long trying to find out the truth. He wrote, following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, "I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth, and I hope that everyone will join, with me, my doctors, and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease." That was it. No performance, no elaborate rhetoric. Just the statement of a man who had decided that the truth was the last gift he could give. Less than 24 hours later, on November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury died at Garden Lodge. He was 45 years old. The cause of death was bronchial pneumonia brought on by AIDS. He died in his home, surrounded by the people who had kept his secret and kept his dignity and kept their promises to keep making music with him until the very end. The world found out and grieved in the way that only happens when someone takes a part of the culture with them when they go. Radio stations played Bohemian Rhapsody for hours. Fans gathered outside Garden Lodge and covered the stone walls with flowers and letters and drawings. The writing on that wall built up over the years into something permanent, a kind of monument that no one officially constructed, but everyone agreed should exist. Brian May said afterward that they missed the medications by just a few months. Within months of Freddie's death, prescriptions for combination antiretroviral therapy were beginning to show that HIV-positive patients could live for years, even decades. The timing was cruel in a way that does not soften with the telling. If the science had arrived just a little earlier, if the treatments had existed just a few months sooner, Brian May said, he would still be with us. He would still be with us. But he is not. And so what remains is the music, and the story of how it was made, and the story of a man who sat in a room with his 3 closest collaborators and told them he was dying and then asked them to do the only thing that made any of it bearable. Keep writing, keep playing, don't stop. I need the music more than I need the grief. They gave him that. Right to the end, they gave him that. There is a statue of Freddie Mercury in Montreux. It stands nearly 10 feet tall on the edge of Lake Geneva, looking out over the water. His arm is raised, his chin is lifted. It was unveiled in 1996, 5 years after his death, by his father and by Montserrat Caballé, the opera singer he had collaborated with and loved. The sculptor was a woman named Irina Sedlacka, and she captured something in the bronze that photographs alone cannot fully hold. The suggestion of movement, the sense that he is about to open his mouth and make the whole lake vibrate. When the band gathered in Montreux in those final months, Brian May said that Freddie found an amazing tranquility there. He said he never really heard him complain. He said the sicker Freddie got, the more he seemed to need to record, the more he needed some reason to get up in the morning, some proof that the voice still worked, some confirmation that Freddie Mercury was still Freddie Mercury even as the body that housed him was being systematically destroyed. The album Made in Heaven was released in 1995, 4 years after Freddie's death. It was built from the vocals he recorded in those final sessions, the ones where he stood in the studio and sang because it was the only thing left that still felt like living. Brian, Roger, and John completed the tracks. They added the music around the voice. It was the last thing they could do for him, and they did it the way he asked them to. Carefully, honestly, without self-pity. The title was perfect, Made in Heaven, because whatever it was that Freddie Mercury did in a recording studio in the last months of his life, it defied every reasonable expectation of what a human being in that condition could do. It was something else entirely. It was the sound of someone refusing to stop being alive until the very last possible second. The story the world never fully told is not really about a disease. It is not really about the press outside the gate or the medications that came too late, or the tragedy of the timing. Those things are real, and they matter. But the center of the story, the part that cuts through everything else, is a room, a conversation, and a decision made by 4 men who had been through everything together. Freddie Mercury sat down with Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon, and told them the truth, and then he told them what he needed. And they looked at each other, and they said yes, not with pity, not with the kind of false cheerfulness that people use when they don't know what else to do. With genuine respect, genuine love, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest thing you can give someone is exactly what they ask for and nothing more. He asked for music. They gave him music. And he gave them, in return, some of the most extraordinary performances ever committed to tape by a human voice. Performances recorded while his body was failing, while photographers pressed cameras against the windows of his home, while the clock moved forward in only one direction, and he moved with it and kept singing anyway. "Write me more," he said. "I want to just sing this." They wrote him more, and when he was gone, they finished it. That is the story. That is what happened in the room. That is who he was. Farrokh Bulsara, born in Zanzibar, raised in England, renamed in Ambition, the man who became Freddie Mercury, and then, in the end, became something even harder to name and even harder to forget. A man who faced everything that was coming for him and asked only to keep singing until it arrived. And he did. God, he did.